Hi, I'm Father Michael Orsi. I'm your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ and the little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. Hey folks, you know, we've known each other a long time, and you know that Father O is no big fan of Marxism, communism, the totalitarian state. Yeah, you know I have my issues with Cuba. I have my issues with Red China. I have my issues with a lot of the things that are going on in South and Central America. I mean, you know, they're like a Chinese satellite state, some of these places. What we find is these totalitarian regimes, what they do is they go in there promising people the moon. We'll give you everything. We're going to take care of you. And then once they get into power, well, guess what, folks? They don't take care of you. They take you in, and they take care of themselves. Now, we have a lot of evidence. You know we got a lot of evidence of what's happened in communist countries. We know the stories of Russia when the Soviet Union had the gulags and all of those horrible things. All the people that they killed in Ukraine, my gosh, they starved those people to death. We know what has happened in Eastern Europe before the curtain fell, thanks to President Reagan, John Paul the Great, and Madam Thatcher. You know all of these things. Well, maybe some of the stuff you don't know is about some of the people who survived these nefarious regimes. And we have these countries today, they're not too far from us. Like one, as I said, it's in Cuba. Cuba. It's like 90 miles away. And we have one of these regimes of thugs that are destroying people's lives, taking their property and treating them in a way that is less than human. But people do survive. Now, what I did today is, you know, this program is all about hope. Hope. You know, I'm not going to, say, hey, I'm going to tell you all bad stuff and not give you any of the good news, because it's about good news, folks, about good news. The good news is that people have survived and have lived to write about it. We have a lovely lady, Kristen van Uden, who has written a book, When the Sickle Swings, and she has collected the stories of these survivors of these communist, socialist, totalitarian states. Okay, Kristen, tell us about what you did finding these people that survived evil. And it's evil. It's evil. Go ahead.
It is evil. Yes. Thank you for having me, and such a great intro. It's very disheartening to always see even Catholics sometimes fall for these false ideologies of the communist utopia, which of course promises everything and delivers nothing, even here on this earth. So this project was really conceived when I was in undergraduate. I studied history and Russian area studies.
Where did you go to school?
I went to St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. It's a Benedictine college. And then I went to William and Mary for grad school.
Wow,
so
that was great schools. And they had Russian studies up in New Hampshire, huh?
Yes,
wow.
That's right.
All right.
I was the only one in my year.
I was just wondering how many,
Yes. But I started the project then by interviewing people who had survived various communist regimes, and some of those stories have made it into the book. And what I was struck by was that I was expecting a level of attention given to collecting these testimonies that is given to Holocaust survivors. I've always been very interested in telling the stories of Holocaust survivors as well. Of course, also Catholics suffered during the Holocaust too, so there's that element to it. But I was finding that those who suffered under communism, their stories were just not being told. And whether that's because of a political reason for continuing to push a communist or socialist narrative in the West in a more softer totalitarian way, and those stories were being suppressed purposefully, maybe, or these people just thought that their stories didn't matter because we don't have the same collective memory about communism the way that we do.
I want to stop you right there. Your first argument is the correct argument. How anybody could not condemn communism and what communism does and say, well, maybe we shouldn't talk about it. Folks, I'm going to give you this is a psychological, in-depth explanation. They need a checkup from the neck up, and it is political. Okay, go ahead. I had to get that off my chest, Kristen. I get agitated.
I know. We're no longer staying silent on this topic.
No.
And so I would speak to people, and especially in the Cuban community, which is probably near and dear to your heart being in Florida.
It is. I got Cuban people in my church. I have Cuban friends. I go to every time that I hear about that Diaz-Canal and that old rat Castro, my blood pressure goes up. I mean, what they've done to these people is absolutely terrible. But I'll say one thing, folks. Although they did terrible, horrible, bad things, and they're bad, 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 they sent us a lot of wonderful Cuban people, and they are absolutely great. Okay.
Yes, I know the survivors are really the salt of the earth, and they will be the first to tell you of the horrors of communism, but also of the hopeful message of survival and keeping the faith. And so I mainly, just due to the number of individuals who responded to my requests for interview, focus on several countries. So that would be Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania. Of those, of course, Cuba is still communist, is still an open-air prison, and so has many contemporary stories that continue in this vein. And I was able to track many similarities between the way communism is implemented all throughout the globe in completely geographically and lingual disparities. It's still the same ideology that is driven in really this lockstep.
So you've traced how it communism, totalitarianism gains entry into a society?
I did, but more so focusing on the church. So my background, I have studied the political aspect of communism, but for this project, I identified 5 main actions that communist regimes took against the church as an institution, because not only do they hate the faith because it's the opiate of the masses and, this weak crutch that the weak-minded who haven't been liberated by atheism fall back upon, but they also see the church as a political threat, not least because of the existence of the Vatican and the political power that the Vatican has. So often what I would find is that many Catholics were accused of being Vatican spies when that could not be further from the truth. They were just practicing the faith and receiving the sacraments. So there's this double hatred of the church that causes communists to take these following steps. So I'll just run you through these 5. What I noticed is that first, they outlaw the public worship of the church. So public mass attendance, is either made outright illegal or very highly discouraged. A woman I interviewed from Czechoslovakia recounts having to go to mass in secret, keeping her eyes downcast. Her parents would instruct her, she was a child at the time, don't look around, because if you recognize your neighbor over there and you're hauled before the secret police, if you can't, you would have to lie and tell them, I don't know who was there. But if you keep your eyes down, you can, in good faith, say, I have no idea who was there.
I want to ask you something, though. Like, this happened in the Protestant churches too, didn't it? They wouldn't let them go to Protestant churches too, right?
Yes, right. All faith, basically, especially all forms of Christianity, were highly targeted. Other forms of faith were targeted as well. But anyone expressing any sort of devotion to God, because in communism, of course, the state seeks to take the place of God and to be worshipped as an entity that provides for all of the bodily needs of its citizens. And they view the concept of God even as a challenge to that power and authority. So yes, this is something that, while my book focuses mainly on Catholics, did affect other faiths. Second thing that would happen is to round up the clergy and the religious. So in the context of Czechoslovakia, this occurred in 2 operations known as Operation K and Operation R, where over the course of several nights, they rounded up thousands of priests and nuns and either incarcerated them or forced them into forced labor. This is something we don't hear about. This was after the Holocaust. This was from the Soviet-influenced Czechoslovak government in the 1950s. And nuns were forced to work in factories in really dingy and inappropriate conditions, and were basically stripped of all of their ability to live out their religious vocation. Third, the communist regimes would seize and repurpose church property. We see this in Cuba. Fourth, they control the laity through social pressure. So we all are familiar with the idea of the secret police always bugging your walls or following you around. And this is a common thread that I found amongst these individuals. And a gentleman I interviewed from Slovakia who helped to overthrow that government, actually the communist government there, recalls that working with the secret bishops there, they would develop and actually kind of invent these anti-eavesdropping apparatus to talk to each other through in the house. It was like a horn, and that picture is included in the book, where they would speak through one end and listen on the other, so that whatever technology was in the house wouldn't be able to pick up on their conversations. So this is kind of, many Catholics that I interviewed suffered really a white martyrdom of not being able to go to school, not getting into the good universities, being unable to get a job because they refused to join the Communist Party on principle. And this method of control, it could range from something as simple as that to direct threats, imprisonment, and or death, and actual martyrdom, which I recount in here as well. So it's
before we go on, okay, why are the communist Marxists so fearful of Christianity? Why?
Because it is the true redemption of mankind and of the world. And they seek to be that for mankind. They always posit this false utopia where sin does not exist. They've abolished absolution. So the only sins are those against the party and against their great collective ideal. And Christianity speaks to the individual salvation of each soul. So this is why ideas like liberation theology that we see in Latin America, a communist idea that tried to cloak itself as Christianity but really wasn't, was so dangerous, because it is thinking in the collective rather than seeing the anthropology of the human soul as a fallen, stained by original sin, but redeemed by Christ through the sacraments that the church provides.
Okay. Folks, I want to talk to you about this a moment, okay? What you have are two different worldviews at war with each other, all right? So you have this communist, Marxist, secularist worldview that says, it's all here, we'll give you everything that you need, and you will be living in the, well, they called it in those days, the workers' paradise. Correct, Kristen? Yes? Yes. Okay. Now, the church then has a different worldview. Church's worldview is that we live in this world, but our focus is also on the world to come, and we have the gospel, and we live a life according to the gospel. We do not have heaven here on earth. Folks, let me tell you something. As much as we would like to have heaven on earth, because of our sinful nature, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And once we give ourselves over to a Marxist regime, the regime takes over our life, and anybody that does not agree with what the regime says we should do or shouldn't do, that person becomes the enemy. And therefore, the church becomes the enemy. Why? Because the church sees every human being, every soul as important. Communists don't care about the individual. They care about the state. And anybody that gets in the way of the state and the way the state imagines society should be becomes the enemy. Am I correct, Kristen?
That's right.
See, you think that old Father O is losing it? No. Listen to me, folks. Just listen to me.
Sharp. And there's one story that's very illustrative of this. And we tend to think of communism as merely a political ideology, even a failed political ideology or an economic ideology. But I found many proofs that it goes much deeper and that it is truly, in my opinion, a demonic ideology. So I'll give you one example from the prisons of Cuba. So a gentleman I interviewed related this story to me, where one of the threats or mind games that the guards would play with Catholics to induce them to apostatize was to promise them that they would be freed if they went back on the faith, gave up their faith, denied Christ, and then, of course, submitted to re-education in the camps to be made into a good little communist. Many people sadly succumbed to this re-education out of weakness, out of starvation, hunger, torture. But those who stayed strong, they were called the plantados, which means firmly planted in the ground, because they were unable to be budged. And I was lucky to speak with a gentleman who was in prison for 17 years and still didn't budge. And one tactic that was used was, again, this lie of, we'll let you free if only you deny the faith. What happened, though, is that sometimes people would fall for this and say, okay, fine. If I deny the faith now, I can always go to confession when I get out. I might get to see my family again. Jesus knows what's in my heart, blah, blah, blah. And they would deny the faith. And then the guard would sadistically point the gun at them and say, just laugh at them and say, now you're going to go to hell, and shoot them on the spot. And so immediately they stole not only their freedom and this promise of this future freedom, but also their soul in that moment. And of course, God only knows the fate of those poor souls. But that really drove home to me that these guards, and this was used in the Spanish Civil War too by the communists there, they were after the souls. They were soul killers, and it was beyond a political ideology for them. They had this true hatred for the soul in the state of grace and wanted to murder the soul.
Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it?
Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events.
Hey gang, I know a lot of you sometimes can't watch all of our episodes of Action for Life. However, we have a solution for that. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Action for Life Florida. And you can catch up on all the shows, and guess what? Extra added bonus, you get to hear my weekly homily. So, YouTube and you make a fine couple. Let me tell you folks, just so you're clear on this, if you do something wrong under force, pressure, or fear, God understands that you're not fully in control of your free will. So that we leave in God's hands, and I'm sure that God will sort things out because of the person's state of mind. Okay, so God is God. He's merciful and He's loving and He's kind and He's going to help you out. All right. Okay. So So now you get the collection of this testimony. You got it from Cuba. I want to ask you something. How does that regime continue? I mean, I know this is out of your ballpark, dealing with this, but what do you think? How does it? I mean, they're so bad. It's so disgusting. Folks, I have a friend of mine, Father Alberto Rios, and he comes over here to visit every once in a while, and he tells me what's going on over there. This beautiful country that had, beautiful, fruits and vegetables and everything, and nobody's working. The fields are barren, and they're starving. And they say, "Oh yeah, but they have a great medical system over there." Yeah, if your family brings you the medicine, they have a great educational system over there. Yeah. What good is it if everybody's starving over there? I mean, as I said, thank God, we're making out in this country because the Cuban people come over here and they work and they study and they love the church and they have great Cuban restaurants too. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so
Sure.
How does it continue?
So, yeah, that's a good question on Cuba, and I'm not as familiar with their contemporary politics, but I know there was a protest in 2021,
right.
Known as the Sunflower Protest, where the people stood up peacefully and just took to the streets for a peaceful demonstration, and obviously did not topple the regime as it did, as we saw with the dominoes falling in Eastern Europe, but are expressing their discontent in this way. It's difficult, this grabbing the right political moment, where what we saw in Eastern Europe was, again, this domino effect where one would spur the next. And it was just sort of this right time in the right place. And the role of Catholics peacefully demonstrating was actually huge in Eastern Europe. So that's a message of hope to the Cubans and those in China, and anyone, North Korea, Vietnam, who are still stuck under communism. Let's see, I can discuss actually one of the highest profile people that I interviewed for the book was a politician in Slovakia named František Miklosko, and he was heavily involved in the candle demonstration in Slovakia, and also the Velvet Revolution, which was spurred really by this demonstration. It was run by predominantly Catholics who were secretly organizing with the secret bishops and secret priests in order to, again, peacefully take to the streets and express their political desires. And in their case, miraculously, and as he puts it, he told me he considers this a biblical miracle when communism fell in his country. They would hold rosary processions, pilgrimages, and really just had a very religious flavor where they were beseeching God, and they understood that this ultimately could not be defeated. This demonic ideology could not be defeated by human means alone. And so they begged God for his help, and he really attributes the success of the movement to that. A word of, I suppose, background on one of the final challenges. So going back to those 5 points in the beginning, the last one was that communists infiltrate the Catholic Church, whether that's through its institutions or through putting informers in the pews in order to turn people in or get their name on a blacklist somewhere. And in Czechoslovakia, this was a huge challenge because there were two separate entities. There was this organization called Pacem in Terris, which was its final form. Before that, it was considered the National Church. And then there was the Catholic Church, which was subdued and suppressed and still loyal to Rome, to the Vatican, and still maintaining Catholic principles at all costs. The other priests, however, who were loyal to the regime, kind of sacrificed doctrine and began to swallow communist ideals and would turn people in and really just became sort of accessories of the regime.
I want to ask you a question. Yeah, I mean, folks, this really happens where they infiltrate the churches. They even infiltrated the seminaries in Europe and over here too. You ever hear of a woman named Bella Dodd?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell the folks about Bella Dodd.
Yes. So she was an Italian communist, member of the party, true believer, who moved to the United States and worked within communist networks here to, as she tells us, infiltrate the American seminaries with over 1,000 communist loyal men who would then go on to become priests and rise up the ranks, could even be bishops today. And she was converted, or rather reverted, I suppose, under the influence of Venerable Fulton Sheen. And he encouraged her to tell this story so that we understand the full scope of communism and that they are targeting the church in this very direct and tactical way. She never released the names of these men that she helped to place, but she...
Folks, it ain't me. I'll tell you right now, it ain't me.
Yes. Okay, we believe you. But I think we can definitely see that in some of the crisis that has gone on here in the West that really mimics what went on under the Iron Curtain, just in a more indirect way. Clearly, it's a lot of the same principles, so it makes sense that some of these true believers were calling the shots at those levels.
Okay, I want to. This is another tough question, but she's smart, so I'm going to ask her a tough question. The Vatican now has relations with the communist government in China, right? And the communist government says, okay, we'll give you 3 names, and you could pick 3 names, and of one of the 3, and that person can become a bishop, and we'll both agree on this. Now, what's that deal all about? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's working.
I know that's an egregious violation of the rights of the church and the separation of church and state, that a communist anti-Catholic government can be calling the shots and choosing these party men, these loyal men who won't rock the boat, to diffuse church doctrine and to really create this hybrid chimera almost. It's not Catholicism if it's state Catholicism. And it's really a sad situation, but this is following their playbook of putting their own people into the institution to try to lead even those who are remaining faithful astray. Because if they can get the first wave of people to just stop going to Mass under duress and threats directly, then that's a win. But if they can more subtly take this more snake-like approach of getting people to apostatize piecemeal or in steps and just put up with a little bit here, oh, that's fine, what does it really matter? At least we can go to Mass. Who cares if he is soft on the communists, then eventually you wake up one day and you've seen that the slippery slope has fallen and you're the frog in the pot and all of a sudden it's boiling.
So you obviously think that this is kind of like a bad idea.
Yes.
Okay, folks, you heard it. Kristen thinks it's a bad idea. All right, well, you're entitled to your opinion. I agree with you. It's a bad idea. All right. You get in bed with those communists, you're going to get bugs, bed bugs, fleas, or worse. I know you get, what else could you get in bed? Well, whatever you could get, you're going to get it from them because they're dirty and they're out to destroy the church. I'm going to tell you a story, great story. I was in Russia right after the Soviet Union collapsed. And I went into a Russian Orthodox church and it was pretty full. So I said to a friend of mine who was giving the tour, I said, how did this, faith survive under the communists? And he says to me, well, he says, people, had houses where they had a place to worship. They go to different homes. And he said the other thing that they would do is they would send the old ladies to church. And the old ladies would bring the message home. Because if the men went to church, say, they're up to no good. So the communists would say, what are you going to do when all the old ladies die off? And they would say, more old ladies will come. All right. Now, the message in that is, once again, hope. You cannot destroy the truth. The truth will always survive, even in the most wicked of places, even in the gulags in Siberia, even in the re-education camps in China, even in that terrible, terrible disaster that the communists have perpetrated in Cuba. So, folks, pray hard for Christians who are suffering around the world. I want to thank you, Kristen, for being with us today. Your studies are fantastic. We're going to have to get you a book and read about it. Hey, Kristen's for action, I'm for action, and I know you are too.
Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it?
Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events.